Everybody. I'm Jack Petranker. I know a lot of you, but there's a lot of you that I don't know. And so it's wonderful to have more people joining us and participating. Let me mention that the origin of this presentation, the reason we're doing this, has to do with the Israel Study Group, which is being organized by Itzhak Price, whom you can see on your screen there. So thank you, Itzhak, and thank you to everybody who is participating in Israel. I know you just finished a retreat, a caring retreat, and Itzhak tells me it went very well. So this is a kind of an additional element of the program at the end of that retreat, but of course it's available for everybody. I am recording the program, and so is Itzhak. So one way or another, or both ways, we will be sure to have a recording, so you can let people know about it afterwards if you think it would be something they'd enjoy viewing, so that they can learn more about the work of Tarthang Tulku, whom from now on I'm going to be calling Rinpoche, as all of his students do. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to present something about Rinpoche's remarkable work. So I'm going to start sharing the screen with the slideshow, the PowerPoint on it. Let's see. Just lost my share screen option. Oh, here it is. Okay, there we go. Okay, can everybody see that? Yes? No? You can't see it? You don't see the screen? Let's try again. Can you see it now? Yes. Okay. I see at least one thumbs up. So let me try to coordinate the many things that are open on my screen. Okay. It's really a wonderful opportunity, as I said, to be able to say something and share something about Rinpoche and his work over these past 50 years. And I'm going to start with a little bit of information about his background also. There's a lot to cover, and I'm sure that at the end of the presentation, some of the people who've been involved in different parts of the projects, the different projects he's done over the years, are going to say to me, well, why didn't you say more about this? And the reason, my excuse in the beginning is that there's just so much that he's done. So we'll cover as much as we can, or at least try to give a little bit of a suggestion of some of the work that he's done. There's a tradition when you read lives of the great teachers, the great masters, sometimes you will see in them a statement that says, if you had only known about the books that he wrote, you would have thought that he spent his whole life writing books. But if you had known about the temples that he built, you would have thought that he spent his whole life writing books. His whole life building temples. Or if you knew about the teachings that he offered, you would think he'd spent his whole life offering teachings. Well, that's how it is with Rinpoche. He has done enough for 10 people. And it's really quite remarkable what he's been able to accomplish. So that's what I want to be able to present today, and let's get started. Okay. So this is just a photo of the way things tend to look in Tibet. I don't know, some of you probably have been there. It's a land of mountains and great open plateaus, great rolling hills.
Jeff, sorry, I cannot see. I see only the first line.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for telling me that. Let me start the show. How's that? Okay? Yes? You can hear it? Yuval and the two of you there? Yes, everybody can hear it. See it, I mean. Okay. Okay, so Tibet mountains, there's a monastery down in the bottom there. I don't really know which monastery it is. Let me show you now the monastery that Rinpoche came from, Tarthang Monastery. Now, Tarthang Monastery, which is in eastern Tibet in the area called Golok, was destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, after the Chinese took over control of Tibet in the late 1950s and early 1960s. So it's been rebuilt. And because I probably won't have a chance to say anything about it later, I'll just mention that the rebuilding was sponsored by Rinpoche and was coordinated by Rinpoche. So that's just one of the things that he's done to support the Dharma in Tibet and to help restore his monastery, which is now an active, flourishing monastery with hundreds of monks active there. Tibet in general was a land where everywhere you went, you saw signs of the Dharma. This is just again, it's at a monastery, but you see this row of stupas, these monuments to the Buddha's enlightenment and reliquaries. And everywhere you went, you saw prayer wheels, stupas, prayer flags, and everywhere here and there in the environment, you also saw monasteries. And so it was the land of the Dharma. It was a land where the teachings really shaped everything. That began to change. And that did change. It changed actually very dramatically after 1951, when Rinpoche, when the people in Tibet, sorry, I'm being distracted by some noise over on the side. That began to change in 1951 when the Chinese began to exert their influence in Tibet. And then in 1959, they entered Tibet and really took it over. And that's when the Dalai Lama, as you know, most of you, had to flee. It was a very difficult time. Tens of thousands of Tibetans, maybe 80,000, maybe 100,000 Tibetans in all, fled. And so let me move on. This is a very early picture from that time. It was taken in 1962, I believe. So it was still at a time when the Tibetans were escaping in any way they could. And this is a picture of Tibetans just arriving after, in most cases, very, very difficult passage, taking weeks or months, carrying what they could on their backs. They were very dedicated to their traditions, so often they carried books or statues, even though they might not have had enough food, it was important to them to bring their tradition with them. Now, Rinpoche was not part of that escape. He was already in India. He had left Tibet in 1958 because his teacher, Jamgon Khyentse Chökyi Lodro, had left in 1958, and it was probably because he could see the problems coming. And he settled in Sikkim, which nowadays is a part of India in the far, far northeast of India. So this is Rinpoche in about 1962. So he was in his mid-20s. And starting to think about what he could do for his culture. What could he do in this new land? Because people didn't know. Sometimes they assumed that they'd be able to go back to Tibet eventually, but there was also the possibility that they would just have to start over again. So Rinpoche did that, and I'm going to skip a lot of space here. He spent 10 years in India, but he eventually decided that he was going to come to the West, and specifically to come to the United States. And in 1968, he left India and went to the United States. And he decided eventually that he would go out to the San Francisco area. And in 1969, he settled in Berkeley, which is where our centers have been since that time. Nowadays, we have centers all around the world, but the home of the Nyingma community, of the Nyingma mandala of organizations, is in Berkeley and at Odeon, which is our country center. So when he settled in 1969, he almost immediately that year founded an organization called the Tibetan Nyingma Meditation Center, or TNMC. Nowadays, we would just refer a lot to the Nyingma mandala of organizations. But TNMC is the heart of the organization. As it says here, it's the religious and administrative center of the Nyingma mandala. And this is a seal. This is the Nyingma seal for the entire Nyingma school, but Rinpoche modified it in certain ways. He designed it with the sense of the vision that he had, which really focused a great deal on preserving and transmitting the tradition. And I won't go into the details of what the seal represents, but every single element of it does have significance. Let's see. I've already mentioned the mandala of organizations. So TNMC and Nyingma Centers as an organization that helps communicate the vision of TNMC and also the Nyingma Association of Mandala Organizations. All of that is in the center, you could say. And then around it, in the form of a mandala, we have these key elements that Rinpoche has created and started creating from the very beginning. And so I'm going to use this mandala structure roughly to present what he's accomplished. So we'll start with the work of the Tibetan Aid Project, which is in the south of the mandala. So let me go back up. As soon as Rinpoche arrived, he started reaching back out to the Tibetans who were in exile in India. At that time, there was no way to connect with the Tibetans under Chinese control, but there were many, many refugees, and they were very poor, very much in need of help. So he created a pen friend program where Westerners would write directly mostly to lamas and monks. And these are lamas and monks who sent in their pictures and information, and then a pen friend would start writing them and would send monthly contributions. And the contributions were very small, $10 a month typically, but that was a lot for people in India, and it really helped many people, including some important teachers, helped them survive. And Rinpoche coordinated all of that. Most of the communication from the Tibetan refugees was in Tibetan, so he translated all of that. He worked with people on all of that. It was one of the really early projects. This is the picture you just saw. Actually, let me go back for a moment. The young girl holding the poster at the top, I believe, is Wamo, one of Rinpoche's 3 daughters. I don't know who this little girl is that Rinpoche is holding in his lap, but that's Rinpoche over there. And we made posters and distributed them. It was a very successful program for many years and had a big impact on the Tibetan refugee community. Now, if you jump forward 40 or 50 years, This is the Tibetan Aid Project today. This is a major fundraising event that the Tibetan Aid Project holds every year, not this year, of course, in one of the one of the really elegant hotels in San Francisco. It's a dinner and it's a fundraising activity, and the Tibetan Aid Project continues to be very active in raising funds. Nowadays, those funds mostly go to support the projects that Rinpoche has for the distribution of texts to the refugee communities or to the Tibetans in India, and also nowadays into Tibet. So I'm not going to say more about the Tibetan Aid Project. Of course, I could spend a whole hour and more talking about that, but we'll just have to move on. So I'm going to go next to the Nyingma Institute in the north of the mandala. So this is the Institute. There are actually two big buildings of the Institute, but I'm only going to show you this one. It was the original Institute building. The Institute was founded in 1972. So 3 years after Rinpoche arrived. By then, he was already teaching on a regular basis. There was a lot of interest, and Berkeley was a very good place for that. People wanted to know about the Tibetan tradition. So he had started teaching, but he decided that we needed a separate center for that, and that's how the Nyingma Institute came to be. And this building was acquired in 1973. And it's still in operation now, so almost 50 years later. And we have a new building that's about the same size immediately behind it. The Institute, this is a picture of the Institute prayer wheels, or they should say the Institute prayer wheel garden. There's a giant prayer wheel here. I don't know if you can see it exactly here in the background. One of the characteristic things that Rinpoche has done, and we'll see a little more about that later, is he's created thousands, literally thousands, of these massive prayer wheels, and they turn with electricity. And that was brand new. Nobody had ever made prayer wheels that turn using electricity. But in Tibet, they had used natural forces. There are prayer wheels that turn using water, using streams, and there are prayer wheels that use air and that use fire. The heat of the prayer wheel, the heat of a candle can turn a little paper prayer wheel. So in this case, we're using another natural force, electricity, to turn the prayer wheels. And it's one of the characteristics of of Rinpoche's work that he has created prayer wheels throughout all of our organizations. And as I say, literally thousands of these electric prayer wheels, and then hundreds of thousands of hand-turned prayer wheels, which he's distributed. And we'll say more about that later. So this is inside the Nyingma Institute. This is actually in the other building. There's a big meditation hall there, a Dharma hall, and the deans of the Nyingma Institute these days are Pema, who is Rinpoche's daughter, and Lama Palzang, her husband. And they've been the deans for about, 5 or 6 years now, something like that. I apologize if I've got the dates wrong. So it's a place for retreats and classes and all sorts of programs. And for many years, it served as a way for people to learn about Ningma and to learn about Buddhism. And it has inspired other Nyingma centers and other Nyingma institutes in other parts of the world. This is the meditation hall in the other building, the original building, and these are people doing Kumye. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the practice of Kumye. Let's go back now, and we'll start taking a look at the printing and publishing activity. So when Rinpoche was still in India, he founded a press and taught himself how to print, and actually had to create the font, the typesetting element, to be able to print text in Tibetan. And he did that in Tibet in India, because he had a very strong sense that the whole of the Tibetan tradition was in danger, could be lost. And for him, the most important thing that he felt he could do was preserve the written Tibetan tradition. So he started that in India and was able to print about 20 traditional texts. And then when he came to the United States, he immediately refounded Dharma Publishing and Dharma Press. And then in addition, Dharma Publishing has produced a lot of books in English, translations, but also a lot of Rinpoche's writings. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. So this is the early press, the early operations. Now, the earliest operations were just a little hand press, something that would fit in a hallway. In fact, I think it was in a hallway when Rinpoche originally started. But by the mid-70s, we had started a real printing operation, and people taught themselves how to print. And Rinpoche helped them because he knew. He had taught himself how to print in India, so he was their original guide. And in the mid-1970s, or about 1974, I believe, we received the donation of a huge press. This was this press here. And that press is still in operation today. It's a 65-inch press, which just means it's very, very big. It can print very big things. Today we use it to print the text for prayer wheels. Nobody knew how to operate it. Nobody had any idea how to operate it. But Rinpoche was very happy to have it. He rented space for it. And gradually people began to learn, and eventually they found someone who could help them learn. And so we just started to develop this entire press operation to be able to produce texts in Tibetan and texts in English. So this was the press as it looked in the, I would guess, in the late 1970s. This is not the same building. This is the press as it exists today. It's located at Ratnaling, which is a center that we've founded. I'll say more about that later. And this is a very modern press. We've got 5 different presses actually. And then this machine that you're looking at here is called a collator. And these are Tibetan texts in the traditional Tibetan style, which are these long, skinny texts, which is based actually on the way the texts were written in India on palm leaves. So the Tibetans copied that basic shape. Nowadays, we do a lot of our Tibetan texts in a more Western format as well. So this collator makes life a lot simpler. The whole press is mechanized in a lot of ways, but of course it still requires the work of volunteers. And I should mention, as most of you know, that almost all of the work that we do in the Nyingma Mandala is done by volunteers. People who come because they want to help, because they want to learn about Tibetan Buddhism, because they've been attracted by Rinpoche's books, because they want to see what it's like to live in a Buddhist community. So everybody you see in this picture is a volunteer. So let's go on. So this is kind of a very quick overview, because we don't have time for more, of what Dharma Publishing and Dharma Press have been able to accomplish. In 1978, Rinpoche, now that he had trained people, he started production on an edition of the entire Tibetan Buddhist canon, all of the texts that are accepted by all the schools in Tibetan Buddhism. It's more than 5,000 texts. And as it says here, in 120 Western style volumes. And then after that project was done, and the volumes are the ones that you see here. You'll see one in close up in just a little bit. But after these volumes were finished, he went on and a few years later started producing texts that were particular to the Nyingma tradition. It's another collection called Great Treasures of Ancient Teachings. The books look the same on the outside, but it's a much bigger collection. These are huge collections, 627 volumes, and we keep adding volumes to the Great Treasures. So in all, it's more than 800 volumes like this, 108 copies of each one. And they've been distributed, especially the Nyingma edition of the Tibetan canon, the Kanjur and Tanjur. They've been distributed to libraries and also to monasteries in all parts of the world. And it's one of the very big projects that Rinpoche has committed himself to. Now, at the same time, we've been producing books in English. So Rinpoche was very interested, it was very important to him to be able to do translations of key texts, and especially in the first 10 years, from say from about 1973 through about 1987, there was a strong focus on doing translations. So we've done about 20 key translations of text so that people have material to work with. And Rinpoche also guided the creation of other works, the whole series that we call Crystal Mirrors, which is to introduce people to Buddhism and to the Tibetan tradition. And a lot of those books are shown here along this wall and also on the table here. Again, something we could spend a lot of time talking about, but we don't have time to do that. This picture lets me say just a little bit about Rinpoche's teachers in Tibet, because these are pictures, photos of his teachers. He studied with some of the greatest masters in Tibet while he was a young man before he left Tibet in 1958. And he's one of the very, very few lamas left alive today who had that kind of classical training. So he's realized for many years that it's so important to be able to transmit that. And that's why Dharma Publishing and Dharma Press have really been at the center in many ways of his activity. Starting in the late 1980s, we developed the ability to create typeset Tibetan texts. Everything we'd done before that was basically reproductions, photocopies of original Tibetan texts, which we were able to acquire, and then we cleaned them up, we made them better. But they were photocopies because we didn't have the capacity to produce Tibetan texts ourselves, to typeset them. But starting in the late 1980s, we did, and Rinpoche designed a font that would let us do that. Now, what you're looking at here are original Tibetan texts, but you can see, and this was in the early days, you can tell because there's this old-fashioned monitor here. But we developed the ability to be able to work with computers to create these texts and print them. And then the next step was to be able to typeset our own texts. So here you see a stage in the production process after the texts have been created by the editorial team. They go over to the press, and then their plates are created. So these are metal plates, which are then put on the presses, and that's how the books are created. Here's an example of the books that we created. They're really big. I don't know if you can see that from this. I think it's about 14 inches here, which would be about 35 centimeters. And they were really, when they were published, we received publicity from around the world because this was one of the biggest publishing projects that anybody had ever undertaken. And it was just being done through Rinpoche's guidance and inspiration by a very small group of people. So this is a complete set. I think it's actually more than, well, maybe not. It's a complete set of the Tibetan Buddhist canon. The other set is just too big to show. Now, Starting in 1989, once we had the ability to typeset texts, at that time, Rinpoche started creating texts to give away to individual Tibetan monks and lamas, and also to libraries, Tibetan libraries and monasteries. And in order to do that, or at least one of the ways in which that became central to doing it, was that the texts were sent over every year to a ceremony that Rinpoche launched starting in 1989. And the ceremony was held in Bodh Gaya. You can see it here on the map. And what these arrows represent is that people, monks, lamas, nuns, lay people, would come from all over India and to some extent from Tibet and also from Bhutan, Nepal. They would come to the ceremony in order to, in order to participate in the ceremony, which was, and I'll say more about that ceremony in a moment, but also to receive the texts that Rinpoche started distributing there. When the ceremony started, the first year that Rinpoche started, it was in 1989, and he went over himself. And for the first 6 or 7 years, he went over, he himself participated in the ceremony almost every year. In the first ceremony, there were about 500 monks and nuns, or maybe not so many nuns at that point, nuns, monks, lamas, khenpos. And then it very quickly grew. And nowadays it's about 7,000 or 8,000 people who participate every year. In the early years, Rinpoche organized everything. And then he established a committee to which, for the Nyingma Monlam Chenmo, as it's called, the Great Prayer Ceremony, but in English it's called the World Peace Ceremony. So this has been a very, very important focus of Rinpoche's activity along with the texts, and the two come together. So that's why I showed you this slide. Everybody gathers in Bodh Gaya and they do a 10-day ceremony dedicated to world peace, chanting really important prayers and texts. And as part of the ceremony or during the course of the ceremony, the participants receive the text that we've produced. So every year we send over tens of thousands of texts at a minimum, sometimes hundreds of thousands of texts. And it's something that the community puts tremendous energy into, and Rinpoche does also, because he has been the editor for all these texts. He's made all of the editorial decisions and certainly decided which texts are going to be distributed each year, and how they should be distributed, how all that will be done. It's been a big, big undertaking. This is a photo that was taken in the early years when Rinpoche went to Bodh Gaya for the ceremonies and actually handed the texts to the participants. I love this picture. You can see that it became much bigger. So this is a photo from perhaps 5 years ago. And the monks receive texts. In this case, these are texts that are specially boxed, the ones here in front, but they're always wrapped. This is the traditional Tibetan style for a book. And as I say, nowadays we do a lot of books in the more Western style, but it's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of books every year. And over the course of the project, starting in 1989, the distribution of text, we've distributed well over 5 million books. So that's a remarkable accomplishment. If you think back to what I said at the beginning, when I said, if you just looked at what Rinpoche had done in terms of distributing texts, you'd think, well, that's plenty for one Lama to do, because he really hasn't had the help of other Lamas, very little. And that's true, it is plenty, but it's not all that Rinpoche has done. It's just one of the many focuses of all his activity. Every year at Bodh Gaya, when the texts are distributed, Rinpoche also makes offerings. These are huge tankas that Rinpoche produced. This is probably from about 3 years ago. I'm sure other people know better. And again, I'm sorry if I got the dates wrong, but roughly 3 years ago. These huge tankas that people, seamstresses or seamsters, people who sew at Odeon, have spent all year making these tankas. There were 4 of them. This is the tanka showing, of course, Padmasambhava. And then these are banners that contain text and also other sacred images that Rinpoche has made. So every year, incredible offerings to the Mahabodhi Temple. This is the temple that was created to show what Rinpoche, to show or to mark the place where the Buddha was enlightened. The stupa here at the top is the symbolic representation of that. We've been able to participate or contribute to putting new gold leaf on the spire, the very top of the stupa here. And we've made many offerings to Mahabodhi, to where the site where the Buddha was offered, where it was enlightened, and also to other centers. These are statues that Rinpoche distributed to the Mahabodhi Temple. We, starting in the mid 80s or so, we created a foundry at Odeon, our country center. So it was a foundry for making bronze statues, and we invited in experts to help us learn how to do it. But then this became one of the activities of our community, was creating these bronze statues. We've made some very small statues, which we've given away to individuals, thousands and thousands, but also many very large statues, including statues that are 35 feet tall. That's about 10 or 11 meters. For a temple in Odeon, I'm not going to be able to show you a picture of that. But the foundry is another one of the big projects that Rinpoche has initiated. We have also sponsored the creation of bells, world peace bells dedicated to world peace. And I believe we've done 16 or 17 at this point, which have been distributed or installed, I should say, in Buddhist centers all around India and Asia. There's one in China. There's one in Sri Lanka. There's many in India and Nepal. So these are. I don't know the location of this one. I'm guessing it's Sri Lanka, but I really don't know. Again, I apologize if I've got it wrong. And again, Rinpoche designed the bell. He designed the text. It's the bells are. We do not do the bells. This is a very specialized art form, really, to create bells, and they're cast in Germany, and our German center has a lot to do with that. So they've been very. They played a very large role in making this possible. And all of our centers have participated in Rinpoche's projects in different ways. Now, since we're talking about Asia and the East, this is a good time to talk about the Sarnat International Nyingma Institute, which Rinpoche created. I think I'll go back up for a moment. This was an institute that we built in Sarnat. Now, Bodh Gaya is where the Buddha was enlightened. Sarnat is where he first taught the Dharma. So those are probably the two most important pilgrimage places in India. And Rinpoche created this institute. It's under the direction of one of his daughters, Tsering. And in recent years, it's new. It was only founded, it opened in 2013, I believe, 7 years ago. And it's become the site for another peace ceremony, the Tibet peace ceremony, that's dedicated more to the Tibetan Sangha and the Tibetan community. People gather for prayers there every year. But there are ongoing activities. There are Khenpos who are working at the International Nyingma Institute at Sarnat, Sini, we call it. And Sini is intended as a bridge between the East and the West. So it's very new, it's very young, so it's still developing. And I'm sure there'll be wonderful things that come from it in the future, again, through Rinpoche's inspiration and guidance. This is in the main Dharma hall in Sini during the ceremony. The Dharma hall is beautifully painted. We had a well-known muralist who came and did murals based on the life of the Buddha. It's a beautiful place to be. We have documented a lot of these events, and perhaps you'll have a chance to see some of the films that have been made. This film in particular, called The Great Transmission, is really the story of how the Tibetan community, the Tibetan Dharma heritage preserved the teachings, and how Rinpoche took up that whole lineage, because Tibet played an incredibly important role, because in the 12th century, at the end of the 12th century, invaders entered India, and really at that point, Buddhism in Tibet, in India, was pretty much destroyed. But by then it had been transmitted completely to Tibet. So there are other important traditions. There's a tradition in Southeast Asia. There's the Chinese and Japanese and Korean traditions. But in terms of the written heritage, Tibet played this vital role in preserving that heritage, so it was not lost to humanity. And Rinpoche has continued with that heritage of preserving the tradition. It's a project that's so dear to his heart. And this is a film crew, just to give you an idea. We have our own documentation operation called the Guna Foundation, and they've produced these films. And another one, I just don't have time to go into all of that. Now, we have also sponsored a different ceremony, also held at Bodh Gaya each year initially, for the Theravadan Sangha, the Theravadan monastic community. And this is the community that is active in Southeast Asia: Thailand, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Laos, parts of Vietnam. It's a very vigorous, active community. And Rinpoche decided starting in about almost 20 years ago now, that he wanted to support this community, partly because it's an important Buddhist community, but especially because he has a dream, it's part of his vision, that the Dharma will be restored in India, because India is its homeland, and the most important pilgrimage places for Buddhism are in India. And his deeply felt sense is that if we can restore the Dharma as an active, strong, living tradition in India, that will guarantee its survival for a long time to come. And he felt that the Tibetans were not the right people to restore the Dharma in India. So he wanted to make the connection. He wanted to make sure that the Theravadan Sangha would be able to thrive in India. And for that purpose, he created a foundation, Light of Buddha Dharma Foundation. It's run by another of his daughters, Wamo, whom you see here. And if you remember at the very beginning, I showed you that picture of the Tibetan Aid Project poster and a little girl holding it. That was Wamo. So here we are a good many years later, and now she's in charge, responsible for this project of really helping restore the Dharma to India through the Theravadan community. So for many years now, we have sponsored ceremonies at Bodh Gaya, and the Light of Buddha Dharma Foundation does other activities to help train monks in India, because it's not a well-established tradition in India, but we're doing our best to make sure that it does develop. And as part of that activity, the ceremonies for the Theravadan community have expanded to other places. I think they're now held, again, not this past year, but they're now held in 12 different locations around the world, including Berkeley. And so this was a ceremony, this picture was taken a few years ago in the temple at Mangalam Center, which you'll see a picture of pretty soon. But this is the temple inside there, and local monks and nuns come every year, and lay people also. Nowadays, it's held at a sister center, Dharma College, located very nearby. So, but there are also ceremonies in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, other places in India, and also now on the East Coast. And those ceremonies, what's done at those ceremonies is that the Theravadan community chants the words of the Buddha. They chant the teachings of the Buddha. So now we'll go to another area that Rinpoche has been very active in. That is the making of prayer reels. You saw the prayer reels earlier in the Institute garden. Making prayer reels is another project that we've done. We put all sorts of energy into. It's an ongoing project. We are always making prayer reels. And the way prayer reels work is that the texts are placed on these giant rolls, and they have to be prepared in a certain way so that the text is unbroken on the roll. So the idea is that as the text turns on the roll, as the wheel turns, the power of the text is released. And so it's important to have it be in an unbroken line. So we have a lot of equipment that we've developed over the years for making these prayer reels. You can see here, it's a cool device for actually rolling the prayer reels. You can see the finished rolls in the front here, which will then be assembled. They'll be stacked on top of each other to make plates or to make bigger prayer reels. Or in this case, I think these are handheld prayer reels. I'm not sure, they look kind of big. Anyway, we also do handheld prayer reels. So again, as I say, we've done thousands and thousands of prayer reels. They're turning all the time. And Rinpoche loves to do calculations about how many billions of prayers or texts are being released every minute by these prayer reels for the benefit of all beings. Just as much as he is dedicated to preserving the written tradition, he's dedicated to generating this kind of merit through prayer reels and other activities, because releasing the prayers and the text, because often there are these long, long texts, but releasing them generates an incredible power that can benefit the whole world. So these are handheld prayer reels being given to Tibetans, I think in Bodh Gaya. Tibetans have always loved to turn prayer reels by hand, and these prayer reels are incredibly prized by the Tibetan people because they contain so many texts. And it's because we can print the texts, we can print the prayers on very small type, but very legible. They have to be legible. And so we can fit an incredible amount of text. I think the whole conjure, that is the actual teachings of the Buddha can be fit into one of these prayer reels and more. So they love these, and we've given away over, I think about 160 or 70,000 individual prayer reels to Tibetans. We also do prayer flags. And prayer flags are another tradition in Tibet, and the same idea, the same basic idea, that when you print prayers and sacred images on flags and then fly the flags, they're released as the wind blows the flag back and forth. And so it's like prayer reels, but just another way of harnessing the energy of nature to, or human energy when people turn prayer reels, to share these blessings and benefits with the whole world. So we make these huge prayer flags. Nobody has ever made prayer flags as big as the prayer flags we make. This is one prayer flag you can see right here. And this is a prayer flag flying, a finished prayer flag. We also make small prayer flags, and actually these are made by our centers in Brazil. So they have their own press operations, and they produce texts in Portuguese. They also have done major production of texts for the Tibetans in Tibetan, but they also have the ability to create to print these prayer flags. And so they print tons and tons. And this is much more like what traditional prayer flags look like in Tibet, relatively small. The reason we make these big ones is, well, bigger is better, but also because we fly a lot of them at our country center, Odeon, and there are very fierce storms. And a flag like this wouldn't survive a single year, probably, at Odeon. So we make them out of a very durable cloth, the kind you use for sails. And they also get destroyed, but it takes a few years anyway. We also make what are called satsas. This is a mold for a very big satsa. Again, we make huge satsas compared to the ones they made in Tibet. This is an image of Avalokiteshvara. So it's made out of clay, and then the satsa is stamped. And you can actually see, so this is a finished satsa that is being gold leafed, because gold leafing is something else we do a lot of. This is the stamping machine for creating the satsa, and here you can see the process. It starts with a chunk of clay, and then gradually it's refined and refined. And then the final step, which isn't shown here in some cases, is that we gold leaf them. Now, here are some gold leaf satsas, and this will start to be especially interesting for those of you in Israel, but actually in all of our centers, because these satsas or satsas like them were part of a project that was initiated, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago. Itzhak can tell you more because he was one of the key people in making it happen, called Planting Seeds of Healing. And the idea was to bury these satsas, which again is something that's traditionally done in Tibet, was to bury these satsas in places where there had been great suffering, for the sake of healing, for the sake of restoring balance to the earth. So planting seeds of healing. The first satsas in this project were planted at the site of a concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen, a German concentration camp, and the Dutch and the German centers were both very active in doing this, and they cooperated together, which in itself was a very healing act. And then we also did a ceremony a couple of years later at Auschwitz, the biggest and most deadly of the German concentration camps. You can see the satsas being planted or being placed in the ground here. That's Itzhak. And here, they're being buried in Israel. There was a whole project to plant or bury these seeds of healing, these satsas, all around Israel. I was fortunate to be able to participate in that at one point. And I remember when I was there and I asked Itzhak something about, how did you decide where to put them? He said, well, in Israel, you can bury them anywhere because every square foot, every single square meter in Israel has been a site of great suffering. So that's been another project that is still ongoing. Rinpoche, in the next month, people are going to be going throughout the Northwest United States to plant satsas or to bury satsas for the sake of healing. So we've now covered everything. We haven't really covered it, but I've said something about all of these centers except Odeon and Ratnaling. This is Ratnaling. This is a view of the meditation hall from the outside. I don't have time to show you very much about Ratnaling, but it's a very beautiful center, and it's a place where people can come on retreat. And we are increasingly developing it as a place for the Nyingma community to be able to gather and hold retreats and programs of different kinds. We acquired the land for Ratnaling in 2004, and by about 2010, it was fairly well developed. Big project. By 2010, I'm going to make a detour for a moment. We had also acquired a couple of properties in downtown Berkeley. So this is Mangalam Center. You saw the interior of it. The focus of Mangalam Center is research and connecting with the academic community that studies Buddhism in order to really find the right language and the right way of presenting the teachings for the West. And down at the other end of the block here is Dharma College, which focuses on Rinpoche's teachings and presenting those, and has a beautiful, beautiful Dharma hall inside it also. This small building in between is not currently being used. It was the site for the Tibetan Aid Project and a Dharma publishing bookstore and other projects, but we plan on developing it for housing. This is an example of, this is a class being taught at Dharma College. And so I only have a couple of minutes left, but I'll try to go through this fairly quickly. I haven't said anything about Odeon yet. I haven't forgotten. We'll get to it at the very end. I already mentioned the Light of Buddha Dharma Foundation for the Southeast Asian Buddhism, but there are 3 light foundations that are focused on Tibet, and they have done a great deal to restore or to help preserve or to support the teachings within Tibet, where the teachings are always under pressure. The Chinese government is always applying pressure, and it's a little difficult to work there because the government scrutinizes what goes on so closely. But the Light Foundations have sponsored ceremonies, have built prayer wheels, have helped restore monasteries, a lot of different activities, and in recent years have been able to start distributing the texts that we print. We've been able to print them in China and then distribute them, including the entire teachings of the Buddha, the teachings of Longchenpa, one of the great Nyingma masters, many other masters. And this is an example of a monastery. We've been able to completely restore certain monasteries that had been abandoned and create schools. Rinpoche has been very, very intent on that, especially, well, in many cases, but especially places where he himself studied or where his Dharma brothers from Tibet had created something, and he wants to be able to restore it. Now, Odeon, I promised Odeon. I can't say very much, or I'm not going to show you very much about Odeon. It's an incredible place. But Rinpoche doesn't really like to publicize it very much. So I'm coming right up against the edge of what's possible. This is the central mandala of Odeon. As you can see, it's built in the shape of a mandala, the central temple. There are other temples. Vajra Temple is up here to the west, Chintamani to the south. And then I'm going to end with one more photo from Odeon, which is the Enlightenment Stupa. This stupa was completed early on after we acquired the land for Odeon in 1980. There are offerings made to it in so many ways. The entire surface of the stupa is covered with texts and sacred images. The stupa is gold-leafed. I think it's the largest gold-leafed structure in the world. It's 113 feet tall, which is about 35 meters. And there are ceremonies held there. And it's traditional to end any presentation of the Dharma with a stupa as an image of the enlightenment of the Buddha. So that's what I'm doing here, ending this presentation. We'll stop there, and we'll open it up for questions. So you're welcome to just speak up or raise your hand, or you can type something in the chat box if you'd rather ask your question that way. Or make any comments. You're free to say things like, it's incredible what's been done. That's the right comment to make. It's actually very good to appreciate and admire your teacher, because that gives you the frame of mind which will allow the connection to the teacher to grow stronger so that it can grow in your heart. So that's one of the reasons for doing a presentation like this.
We are incredibly joyous and so appreciative and just so amazed at Rinpoche's incredible activity and prayer for his long life, and for all the Sangha who participated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're
Thank
really
you so much.
happy we spent this morning with you, and we were always curious about Rinpoche's, wonderful work, and you really put a picture to those wanderings, and we are very joyful. We rejoice in the success that Rinpoche and your community have done. I have another question, is for the wonderful, Satsas, or particularly like the prayer wheels, gutangs, do you have a resource? Is it available for people, Buddhists like us? Can we sort of acquire them? And is there a place where we can get these things? Because these are done so beautifully. We live in Arizona, so I mean, there are people, it's beautiful because.
I don't fully know the answer to that. Generally speaking, they're not distributed, but sometimes there have been times when we've invited people to make offerings, make a donation, and in exchange, in return, we've given them tatas. So why don't you, I guess, connect with Itzhak, since you know how to do that, even though that means your message will go over to Israel, and then it'll bounce back here, and I will figure out who the right person is to talk to about that, okay?
I mean, particularly like prayer wheels and all, those are beautiful. And you can get those in the East, but I think the ones you have done supersedes all qualification, because Rinpoche has done meticulously according to tradition.
Exactly, so exactly. That's very true.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So
it is possible. It is possible to get prayer flags, and so I'm quite sure of that. So ask about. So make the connection, and we'll ask. Ron says miraculous. That's the right spirit, Ron.
And also the bells; those are fantastic. We saw we went to Sri Lanka 2 years back, and we were so proud to see your Rinpoche's. The bell there at the foothill of Sripada, where Guru Rinpoche is supposed to have,
beginning of
propounded Stockton teachings.
That's right. That's right.
It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, don't thank me. Thank Rinpoche and the community. I mean, Rinpoche is always very careful to say that none of this would have been possible without his, the people who've gathered around him and really given the better part of their lives in many cases to be able to make this happen. But but nonetheless, Rinpoche is the inspiration, the guidance, the direction, and totally involved in all of these practices. I once was at Odeon with Rinpoche, and it just struck me, and I said to him, I said, Rinpoche, you must have had to make so many decisions here at Odeon for all the things that needed to be done. And he said, yes, every 6 inches. And
that's
remarkable.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great, huh? Beautiful.
You're blown away and have nothing to say, right? Okay.
True.
Okay. So Karna, there's another comment. Miraculous indeed. Yeah, he arrived in the U.S. as a refugee. That's yeah. I've always heard the story that he had $10 when he arrived in the United States.
Wow.
And yes, how did he manage to mobilize all the means necessary to do what he did and continues to do? So Rinpoche always talks. He always says three things: the people around him, who have given their energy and have, who have followed him, even if they didn't always understand what he was doing, but they have followed him. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the freedom of religion that America guarantees. He says he doesn't think it would have been possible to do it anywhere else. And of course, I mean, I know America's going through a difficult time. But you have to think back, especially when he arrived in 1968, 69, that just, there's still a lot about America that really is important. And the tradition in America is to speak of this as the land of opportunity. And Rinpoche certainly would agree with that. So that's the second thing, what America offers. And the third thing is the blessings of the lineage. He's very clear. He said none of this would have been possible. He said it's just impossible. I mean, he kind of says the same thing that you just said. How could this ever happen? I came here with no money, nothing. I hardly spoke English, and somehow it happened. And he's absolutely certain that it's through the blessings, through the blessings of his teachers and the blessings of the lineage. I know it's just almost too much to comment on, right? Or too much to ask about.
Jack, hi.
Yeah.
Totally, really blown away by all this, especially I'm really moved by the burying of the Satsas. It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to do. And it really warms the heart. It's just, well, it's beyond words, really. And I'd just like to know, how big is the global community that
yeah, good question. It depends a little on how you count, but it's not very big. It's somewhere around 100 to 200 people. So we have centers, three centers now in Brazil. A center in Cologne, in Köln, in Germany, a center in Amsterdam, and then we have the centers in Berkeley and Ratmaling and Odeon. So if you add all of those together, it's probably closer to 200 than 100, but it's not much. I don't think it's more than that. Now, there are many people who feel connected. There are hundreds and hundreds of additional people who feel connected, who contribute, who support Rinpoche's work through donations. Maybe sometimes they'll come and volunteer for a while, and then it expands out. But in terms of people who are really giving so much of their time, often full time, but if not that, then steady over the years, I'd say fewer than 200 people.
So that makes it even more miraculous.
Yeah, right. It does. And they volunteer, almost always they volunteer their time.
I also wanted to mention too that there are many, literally thousands of people that are connected to all this amazing stuff that maybe not are even in touch anymore, but they did actually make a contribution of their time or their money or their energy. Thousands of volunteers that maybe stayed for 6 months or a year, and sometimes they go and come back. So beyond, there's this larger community of a few hundred people, like Jack said, but it actually goes out even farther than that. That were really integral to the building of things and some of these huge projects that we don't even have contact with those folks anymore. So it's really been an amazing, it's kind of like you know, a mountain that's really wide at the bottom with all of this foundational stuff raising to the top with the incredible manifestations that we now see.
Right.
So it's just kind of nice to bring that in too, that there's a lot of people that we don't even know about anymore that really had a lot to do with all the stuff that Rinpoche has initiated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. That's really important. Lee is the volunteer coordinator at Odeon, so this is a topic that's dear to her heart.
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
but it's true, and you know, it is true that you know sometimes you'll hear from somebody who will say, "Oh, I worked at Odeon," or you know, I did a retreat at the Institute 30, 40 years ago. You know, and they're just kind of checking in and or saying what it meant to them. But even if we don't hear from them at all, it's true. We're all grateful for the work that everybody has done.
Jack,
It's like,
yeah, maybe you can mention briefly the different field of knowledge. Rinpoche wrote over 40 books, so, and you are very much involved in this part. So maybe you can elaborate on the different fields of knowledge, like Kumne, like time-space knowledge,
Sure.
etc. So,
sure.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. It's something I didn't really have a chance to go into. So this is a good opportunity. So yes, when Rinpoche came to the United States, as I mentioned, his English was really not very good. And it took him a while, but not very long. I mean, very quickly he was teaching, and he didn't let the limitations on his English stop him. And even today, he does not speak by any means perfect English, you know, but he's got this incredible grasp of how the English language works. It's just the subtleties of how different words convey their meaning. And it's always so amazing. And I've worked as an editor for many years on his books, and he will dictate his books. But then when you go back to him, he will question you about just these very, very fine points. How are you expressing that? What's the right way? He thinks about it a lot, and he has an incredible skill there. So in the early days, in the 1970s, the early 1970s, Rinpoche was especially focused on teaching what people wanted to hear, which was really meditation. You know, that's what interested people, and still in a lot of ways, that's what interests people. So he was offering courses and retreats. And I should mention, by the way, that one thing that Rinpoche had to let go of was teaching in public. You know, he taught for the first 10 years that he was here, but at the end of 1978, he just stopped. He had been teaching at the Institute, and he turned it over. I remember, I wasn't there, but I remember being told that he said to the people in charge of the Institute, he said, well, you're Americans. You know how to reach these people. You do it. I have other things that I need to do. And that was when he really started to focus on his text preservation projects. But during those first 10 years, he taught a lot. And a lot of those teachings were, of course, recorded and then transcribed and became the basis for some of his early books. So there are the books that we call the Nyingma Psychology series that are mostly about meditation, but introduced Buddhism in a lot of ways. So Gesture of Balance and Openness Mind and Hidden Mind of Freedom. But then there are other books that he was preparing at the same time and other directions he was going in, because he was really feeling his way. And how can we communicate the value of these teachings in this culture which knows nothing about them? Sometimes he says, when I first came to America, almost no one even had heard of the Vajraguru mantra. He said, but now at least there's some people who know how to chant the mantra. So at least I've accomplished something, he says. But he was looking for ways to do it. So one of the elements, and this is actually something really important to mention, and it relates to what people have said about, well, how is this possible? How could he even do it? And I gave you what I think are the 3 pillars of accomplishment, you could say, for that. But the other thing is he really emphasized the importance of work and producing results as a spiritual path. He calls it skillful means. So those of you who know about Buddhism may know the term skillful means, but he uses it in a little bit different way. What he means by it is that you do the work because the work has to be done. It's incredibly important and urgent to get the work done. And that's especially true for the text preservation work, because he really felt there was a limited amount of time to get the texts, the books into the hands of the people who could use them. But it's true for all of his other work. It's urgent, it's vital, and for that reason, you give it your energy. But it's not as though you're saying, well, I forget about my own spiritual growth because there's all this work that has to be done and that's more important. What he did, what he emphasized, was bringing the two together. And that's what he calls skillful means, using the opportunities that come up in work to really learn to understand yourself, learn to understand your mind and the patterns of your mind, and break through limitations. And work is wonderful that way because it gives you immediate feedback. You can spend years sitting on a meditation cushion, and sometimes you think, oh, it's going well, and sometimes, oh, it's not going well, I'm a failure. But with work, it's like, I did this, and how did I do it? How did we get together to do this? How did we accomplish this? And here are the obstacles. What's coming up? What's going on in my mind that is preventing us from achieving the results we want to achieve? So that's how skillful means works. And that's another way in which he presented the teachings, in addition to the Nyingma psychology series. So, so then the other thing was, when he started teaching meditation to Westerners, he realized that Westerners had a really hard time. Their minds were so agitated. It was very, very difficult for them to concentrate. And so he reached back into the Tibetan tradition for teachings that are known as kumye, which is a kind of a subtle awakening of the energies that course through the body. I'm being very bold here right now and just telling you what these things are all about. I mean, it's much more subtle or rich than what I'm saying, but it's something like that. And he started teaching kumye practices with the idea that it would help people settle down so that then they could do meditation. But gradually, it became clear that, again, you could make kumye into a very rich path in its own right. And so we've produced a number of kumye books. Rinpoche has written a number of books about kumye. Sometimes nowadays we call it Tibetan yoga, because that makes it a little easier for people to get a quick idea of what it's about. And it's probably, well, it is, I'd say, the popular teaching. Kumye is very widely practiced, and we've trained a lot of teachers. It's especially popular in, I'd say, in our international centers, but also here. So there are all of those features came together very quickly. All of those resources, and they were based on the teaching that Rinpoche was doing. Now, also in the 1970s, so again, it's just remarkable to think he was doing all these things. In the 1970s, he founded the Tibetan Aid Project, Dharma Publishing and Dharma Press, the Nyingma Institute and Odeon. All of that happened within the first 10 years that he was here. And he was starting to present all these teachings, which were turned into books. But he also started to develop another teaching, which was an incredible innovation. I'm thinking of a book that he wrote that came out at the end of 1977 called Time, Space, and Knowledge, and he subtitled it A New Vision of Reality. And I've always thought that subtitle was very important. It was he was really presenting a new way of seeing the world, and it was specifically intended for the Western mind. He's written 6 books that are in the Time Space Knowledge series, the TSK series, and one of them has as its subtitle, The Liberation of the Modern Mind. And I think that's just it. It's not Buddhism. He's very, very clear. This is not Buddhism. This is a teaching. It's something separate. It's kind of, well, he doesn't say this, I don't think, but it's kind of an experiment in how can you activate the Western mind in a way that makes sense? And he was very interested in dialogue with science. So the Time Space Knowledge series has a certain quality of being, that he was hoping scientists could relate to. But really, anybody who is interested in or is inspired by the Western cultural tradition, because we have our own very rich tradition. TSK, as we call it, is a way to connect with that. So he started working on that in the mid-1970s, and he published it in 1977, as I say, and that's become another field of study. Since then, he's written so many more. He's written more than 30 books, and in recent years, he's written books that are, again, you could say, experiments. And how can you reach out to the Western mind, and how can you produce something? And mostly, not always, but mostly, he says this, you don't have to study Buddhism to understand this. It's something that you can, you just need to understand your own mind. They're all about understanding. There's a new series that he calls Understanding Self and Mind. And then most recently, he has, he's published Caring, which those of you in Israel who are here today, you had the opportunity to do a retreat just now on Caring. And that's a teaching, he says that's a little different from everything else that he's done, but he points to it. So in Buddhism, there's such a strong focus on compassion. And I'm sure most of you have heard the saying that in order to really practice the Dharma, you need to develop wisdom and compassion. Those are like the 2 wings of a bird. Without wisdom and compassion acting together, the bird cannot fly. So Caring is in the domain, you could say, in the arena of compassion. But I think, and now I really don't want to say very much, because although I helped work on that book, I haven't connected with it for a couple of years. But it's a way, and you all have just been studying it, some of you, so you know more than I do. But it's a way of awakening the heart, where the heart is not separate from the wisdom of the mind. And many of you probably know that in the Buddhist tradition, the word for heart and mind is the same, and the mind is said to be in the heart. It's not, Tibetan monks have always thought it really strange that we think the mind is in the head. No, it's in the heart. When they would wire monks up to these, to fMRI machines to see what was going on in their brains, the monks would just laugh. They'd say, "What do you think you're doing? I mean, what does this have to do with anything?" And sure, the brain is active in that, but the heart of the mind is in the heart. So Caring is about that. So thank you for asking that question, Itzhak. I'm sure I've forgotten half a dozen other things that Rinpoche has written about. He's searched out so many different avenues. It's in a way, it's a perfect reflection of all the different projects that he's undertaken. It's like, go here, go there, everything opens up. Maybe this will really have an impact. It's an ongoing adventure to be involved with Rinpoche and his projects. So there would be time for 1 or 2 more comments or questions.
I've got a comment.
Yes.
As someone that has dyslexia, I do find it fascinating reading Rinpoche's books, all of them that I've read. I haven't read completely all of them, but I've read as many as I possibly could. That a lot of books that are written by an English-speaking author, I find quite jaggedy, and I find I switch off to reading them. And with the Rinpoche's books, it's like reading silk. The words just flow, and I just find it so amazing that they've been written in a second language. And I just, for somebody that struggles with reading and for quite a few years hasn't read, that I've just got books piled up by my bed, and I can't wait for the next one.
Well, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful comment. Thank you. Thank you. I've never heard anybody say that.
I find that incredible. It really is incredible.
Yeah.
And I know that you've helped with editing, but yeah, and that for me, and then to experience everything else, it's like, and I have just been on the caring retreat. My heart's just blown open at the moment.
Oh,
thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, no, that's so sweet. Thank you. That really is a very inspiring comment. Thank you. Well, maybe we should just end it there. It's a nice way to end. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this material, and I should mention, some of you know him. I should mention that a lot of these images were pulled out for me by Hugh Joswick. So I want to thank him for the work that he did in making this possible. We could have gone on, and almost every image could have opened out into 100 more images, but at least this gives some taste of it. So, and again, thank you to Itzhak for making this happen, for suggesting this and making it happen.
Thank you very much, Jack, for this presentation. Thank you. So exciting. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye and thank you.
Thank you, Itzhak. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.